CSX operates 4 north-south main lines within its 20,000-mile network, providing critical links between the eastern seaboard, the Midwest, Appalachia, and the Southeast. These routes keep supply chains moving reliably, including the important Cincinnati-to-Atlanta corridor. This 421-mile former L&N main line is now part of the CSX Atlanta Division, running from northern Kentucky to northern Georgia through rugged terrain with challenging grades and numerous tunnels. Split into 3 subdivisions, the CC, KD, and Etowah, it ties in to the Georgia-owned Western and Atlantic Main Line at Cartersville, which continues south by approximately 50 miles to downtown Atlanta. In this video series, we'll focus on the KD and Etowah Subdivisions, which make up 249 miles of this scenic route. As such, we begin our overview of the Cincinnati-to-Atlanta main line in Corbin, Kentucky, home to an important railroad yard where coal trains are sorted and manifests are parked for crew changes. Nestled in Kentucky's Appalachian foothills, Corbin has been a major railroading cornerstone since the Louisville and Nashville Railroad arrived in 1882. A major yard built in the mid-1880s for coal trains solidified its role. By 1905, after L&N completed its new main line to Knoxville, the old reliable upgraded Corbin Yard with a roundhouse, a 1908 passenger and freight station, and a YMCA by the depot. Corbin's peak came in the 1970s coal boom, when it became the nerve center of the KD sub. In 1970, L&N merged its Knoxville and Atlanta, or K&A, and Cumberland Valley divisions into the Knoxville Division. In 1976, L&N consolidated its operating divisions further by creating the Corbin Division, comprised of the K&A, now KD, EK, CV, and CC subs. As a result, a new 2-story division office and dispatching center was constructed at the north end of the yard in 1977, connected with L&N's Louisville headquarters via a massive microwave tower that stands to this day. The yard, shops, and crew base were then poised to manage surging coal traffic through rugged terrain. Ironically, the K&A's costly expansion from Corbin to Knoxville led to a 1902 Atlantic coastline takeover of the L&N, eventually leading to the creation of family lines in 1974, which became Seaboard System in 1982 and later CSX in 1986. Following the creation of CSX, the Corbin Division expanded to include X-C&O and Clinchfield lines, plus routes to Atlanta via the Etowah and WA subs. CSX also invested $43 million to build a new locomotive repair shop, car repair shop, locomotive service area, and a yard tower, completed in 1988. Gradually, CSX shifted all of its Kentucky-based mechanical services to Corbin, closing facilities in Louisville and Ravenna. By the early 90s, Corbin saw over 30 daily trains. Corbin's decline began in the mid-2000s as coal fell behind cheaper natural gas, superior Powder River Basin coal, and stricter environmental regulations. Train traffic began to decrease significantly, especially in the 2010s. CSX's coal revenues fell by over $1 billion by 2015, thinning KD traffic to roughly 15 daily trains. Branch lines like the Clear Fork and Pine Mountain West quieted as mines closed. In October 2015, CSX closed Corbin's shops, laying off 180 workers and transferring repairs to Waycross, Georgia, and Huntington, West Virginia. Since then, the yard has continued to operate with minimal staff, handling manifests and fewer coal trains. The former Arch Coal Plant track, adjacent to the yard, now serves as Progress Rail's car repair site, where utility coal hoppers are maintained, primarily for non-CSX cars. A symbol of Corbin's past, now on display at the local railroad museum, is L&N 2132, a 1922-built 080 switcher once used in Corbin and Cincinnati. Retired in the 1950s, it was displayed in Georgia for many years and returned home in 2016. Although its Wasatch contracted restoration destroyed its boiler permanently, it, along with the caboose, honors Corbin's L&N legacy. Now a shell of its former glory, Corbin Yard continues to act as a parking lot of sorts for trains awaiting fresh crews. On June 23, 2020, we saw the CSX office car special in Corbin with a mismatched passenger train in tow. The railroad was in the process of repainting its office car fleet into B&O heritage colors, but only about half of the cars were dressed this way in 2020. At the north end of the yard, the locomotives took on fuel, and crews swapped out upon arrival. With a fresh crew now on board, the OCS departed around 3 p.m., bound for Cincinnati, Ohio, where CSX leadership would stay overnight and tour Queensgate Yard. we return to Corbin over 5 years later, on Independence Day 2025, where we found a special coal train about to depart the yard for its journey down the KD. To celebrate the nation's birthday, conductor Hunter Levi placed 3 big American flags on GE ES44DC 5218, which was recently repainted into the CSX.com scheme.
740 Kingsport Corbin Yard Master. Come in, Alex. Go ahead. How we getting out of Dodge, buddy?
All right. I'll show you gone. You be good. Have a good trip.
All right, buddy. You too. Happy 4th.
Train C740 departed just after noon, easing out of the yard with 8,000 tons of coal in tow. Making sure Old Glory was still in place, conductor Levi poked his head out of the cab, proudly wearing his signature cowboy hat. Train crews like these really make our hobby special, and it's always a joy to get a friendly wave and a smile from them. Corbin, Kentucky, a city of 7,900 people, sits in Whitley County at the edge of the Appalachian foothills. Shaped by its railroad and coal heritage, it was originally named Lynn Camp after a Virginian lost in the area around 1800. It was renamed Cummins in the 1870s for a local postmaster before becoming Corbin in 1895. Despite coal's decline in the 21st century, Corbin's rail legacy endures, evident by the many murals on historic buildings throughout the city, not to mention the local railroad museum. Corbin is also a short drive from nearby natural attractions, like Cumberland Falls, known as the Niagara of the South. Corbin is known not only for its railroad heritage, but also the birthplace of Kentucky Fried Chicken. In 1930, Harland Sanders, a former railroad employee, began serving fried chicken at his Shell gas station on U.S. Route 25 in North Corbin. By 1940, he had perfected his famous original recipe of 11 herbs and spices. His Sanders Cafe opened in 1937 and rebuilt after a 1939 fire, became a celebrated roadside stop, and is now listed on the National Register of Historic Places. The cafe's popularity paved the way for the first KFC franchise in Utah in 1952, launching what would become a global fast food empire. Today, the Harland Sanders Cafe and Museum in Corbin honors this history with a restored 1940s kitchen, vintage displays, and a working KFC restaurant, where visitors can still enjoy the same recipe that made finger lickin' good a worldwide phrase. One of the neat features of the KD sub is the abundance of vintage railroad signals. While there are some replacements here and there, the line still retains the majority of its original searchlights. CTC was added to the line in 1963, improving operational efficiency on the KD.
section change.
Bringing up the rear of the train was Tier 4 GEVO number 3260. With 4,400 horsepower, it provided the two lead units with assistance up the steep and circuitous grades of the KD. South of Corbin, we paced alongside the train from Kentucky 26. Woodbine is just south of the yard at milepost 177 and is a great place to record evening southbounds. M541 is one of two daily manifests to operate over the line, with the other being its northbound counterpart, M542. This train almost always needs assistance up Duff Mountain, south of the Tennessee border, as it is usually over 10,000 tons. M541 is a Cincinnati, Ohio to Waycross, Georgia freight. Tropicana reefers are commonly found on 541 and 42. These cars originate from the Tropicana factory in Bradenton, Florida, and are transported by CSX to various locations in the eastern United States. CSX once operated 3 dedicated unit juice trains for Tropicana, with one using the KD to reach Cincinnati from 1997 until 2017. Now, Tropicana cars are moved in blocks, like this one, instead of a dedicated train. Tropicana's future is currently hanging in the balance and is facing serious financial strain as of September 2025. A 4% revenue drop and 10% income decline are being driven by reduced orange juice demand. Williamsburg at milepost 190 is the next sizable town south of Corbin and still retains its original depot. This building was constructed in 1883 upon completion of the railroad, but was relocated north of downtown in 1905 to reduce congestion. It recently received a new metal roof and a fresh coat of paint and is now home to the Whitley County Historical Society and Museum. On October 16, 2022, we intercepted southbound rail train WO22, led by 2 classic EMD SD40-2s. In 2022 and 23, CSX was replacing miles of continuous welded rail on the KD, Etowah, and W&A subdivisions, with much of the work being done near Cartersville, Georgia. High Cliff, Tennessee, 2 miles east of Jellicoe, is just south of the state line and is at the entrance of the Hickory Creek Gorge, one of the most scenic yet challenging stretches of railroad in the southeastern United States. This railroad crossing is a popular spot for photography, with a nearby abandoned house appearing in many railfan images. The lead locomotive, CSX 8368, was built as C&O SD40 number 7509 in June 1970, and CSX 8845 was built as Conrail SD40-2 number 6481 in November 1978. With so many SD40-2s being retired or rebuilt, it was impressive to see a 52-year-old, mostly original locomotive on the point of this work train. On July 4th, 2025, we returned to High Cliff to record more trains in the gorge. The 21 miles between High Cliff and La Follette required 3 tunnels, 14 bridges, including a towering trestle over Davis Creek, numerous deep cuts, and 2 lengthy grades ascending both sides of Duff Mountain. From the state line, the railroad follows the gentle 0.3% grade along Clear Fork for about 7 miles to Chaska, where the grade begins to increase significantly. It's not one of the steepest in the United States, but the tight curves make train handling difficult. It's easy to see why this area received its name, with 800 to 900 foot cliffs lining the walls of the gorge, a geological feature known as Pine Mountain. This afternoon, train M543 was heading south with flared radiator SD70AC number 4748 on the point. This locomotive was rebuilt by the CSX Huntington Locomotive Shop in 2023. The locomotive was built by EMD in 2003, and 20 years into its career, it entered CSX's SD70AC rebuild program, which began in 2019 with 120 locomotives rebuilt so far. The program, which spans a 12-week process for each locomotive, involves overhauling the prime mover and replacing critical components like electronics, wiring, traction motors, trucks, and more. On April 18, 2025, we intercepted auto-rack train M209 at High Cliff. This is one of the only auto-rack trains on the line, running daily from Louisville, Kentucky to Jacksonville, Florida, via Cincinnati and the KD. In the 1990s, this train ran as symbol Q209. The Q stood for quality, as in quality service. In 2022, CSX changed its train symbology to follow a different format, so the M now signifies that this train is considered a manifest. Three miles into the gorge, at milepost 206, the shared CSX and R.J. Corman Clear Fork branch ties into the KD mainline at Holton. R.J. Corman acquired the former Norfolk Southern segment in January 2022. The 6.4-mile Clear Fork branch was completed in 1903 following an aggressive legal battle between Southern and L&N over the charter for this branch, which ultimately resulted in the two companies sharing trackage rights to access the many coal mines along the right-of-way. A 1902 New York Times article reports that the Southern intended to build a 155-mile branch from Bergen, Kentucky on the C&O and TP to Jellicoe, with an extension from Jellicoe through the gorge, allowing them to reach the Clear Fork coal fields from the north. Ultimately, the branch line was never built, so Southern had to settle for trackage rights over the L&N, which had completed its line through the gorge, then known as the Narrows, a year earlier. Since then, Southern and later Norfolk Southern operated the Clear Fork branch using these trackage rights, running from Jellicoe to Holton, where a rock-cut tunnel punches through the hillside, allowing its trains to access the branch. Copperglow was the last mine in operation on the branch, shutting down in 2020 due to numerous factors, including the COVID-19 pandemic. Trevilian is located just south of Holton, where the railroad crosses the Clear Fork on one of the 14 bridges through the gorge. Here, we see train C740 with the American flags still proudly displayed on the DC GEVO. Just south of Trevilian is Morley Tunnel, one of 3 within the gorge. Named for the community located to its south, Morley Tunnel is a great spot to catch trains, with great photo opportunities on either side. On January 12, 2020, we recorded this northbound empty grain train punching through the tunnel on its way to Cincinnati. From Trevilian, we could see the small community of Morley through the tunnel, another quiet settlement. Morley is home to one of CSX Transportation's helper bases, where heavy southbound trains receive additional horsepower to tackle the Duff Mountain grade at Kilsey. The other helper base on this former Louisville and Nashville line is in East Bernstadt, Kentucky, on the CC Subdivision. On this day, a lone AC 4400 was tasked with helping southbound unit grain train G119. Dressed in its as-delivered YN2 paint scheme, it was built in February 1996 in Erie, Pennsylvania. As the church bells rang at Morley Baptist Church for Sunday evening service, we went to the opposite side of the tunnel in Trevilian to record the southbound train. From above, we followed the train as it ran through the gorge. Note the helper locomotive at Morley, ready to latch onto the rear for the assault up and over Duff Mountain. The second of the three tunnels in the gorge is located at milepost 208, 2 rail miles south of Holton. Southbound trains enter and exit the tunnel by crossing 2 curved bridges over Clear Fork. On this spring day, we saw auto-rack train M209 rolling through the tunnel, with the tall racks just barely clearing the tunnel ceiling. From above, you can see the Morley Helper Base as M209 continues its journey south. Because of these tunnels and many others between Cincinnati and Knoxville, CSX cannot run double-stack intermodals on this line. Although coal trains are still seen daily on the KD, CSX has attempted to diversify traffic on the line with new manifests, auto rack trains, and other bulk commodities coming and going over the last decade. Presently, the KD sees approximately 6 to 10 daily trains, with at least 2 being coal. In 2018, CSX considered selling off this line as part of its CSX of Tomorrow initiative. CSX argued that this line was being seriously considered due to the decline of the coal industry, its clearance issues, and the implementation of precision scheduled railroading, reducing daily train count. It was rumored that R.J. Corbin was interested in buying the line from CSX, especially since Corbin would give the short line holding company a legitimate locomotive and railcar servicing facility. But ultimately, negotiations fell through, supposedly because Corbin thought CSX wanted too much for the low-density route. While traffic is significantly lower than in previous decades, CSX has reconsidered how it sees this route, deeming the KD vital to operations, especially in the wake of Hurricane Helene, which rendered its former Clinchfield mainline inoperable in the fall of 2024. With the Clinchfield shut down for most of 2025, CSX has used the KD as a pressure valve to reroute Clinchfield trains, keeping its other busier north-south main lines from being congested. Chaska is at the start of Duff Mountain grade, which rises from 0.3% to 0.8% between here and Habersham, the next town to the south, and from there increases to 1% over the next 4.6 miles to the summit at Duff. You can really hear the approaching train working hard as it begins its ascent up the challenging grade. The coaling tower at Chaska is from the steam days and was once used for refueling the helper locomotives based here. L&N and later CSX stationed diesel helpers here until late 2011 when the base was relocated to Morley. Under PSR, CSX management desperately wanted to eliminate the manned helpers here, but quickly found out that these heavy 2-mile-long manifests were simply too heavy to make it on their own, even with mid-train DPUs. While costly to have a manned crew on duty at all times, it was even costlier to have a train stalled on the grade, with Corbin being the closest locomotive and crew base, at least an hour away. CSX AC-44CW number 11 was the assigned helper unit this afternoon. The GE locomotive was built in Erie, Pennsylvania back in October 1994 and has been faithfully serving on the CSX system since. The manned helper crew is running as symbol H602, with the H signifying its helper status. At Habersham, train 543 stopped to allow the northbound 542 passage. Habersham is at the south end of a 3-mile section of double track that begins at Chaska. While technically not a siding, it's used as one. Kilsey, at 11,150 feet, is the only siding within the 21-mile gorge. Habersham is the preferred meeting point because the double track is over 4,000 feet longer than Kilsey, and the gradient is only 0.8% compared to the 1+% between Kilsey and Duff. Habersham is a popular spot to record trains due to the steep grade and the frequency of meets at the siding. Faversham Independent Missionary Baptist Church can be seen next to the locomotives. This country church building is a great place to park when chasing trains, and its parishioners are friendly and familiar with rail fans. With a careful eye, the conductor of M543 inspected the M542 as it continued north. M543 has been abolished as of fall 2025. This train was short-lived, operated as an experiment to alleviate tonnage on train M541. In its place, CSX operates X541, an as-needed extra for when tonnage is simply too much for a single train. With M542 now clear of the main, the dispatcher permitted the crew of M543 to proceed south, so the engineer coordinated his train's departure with the helper crew, which gave the train a gentle shove from the rear.
You're ready, we are.
Back in 2020, we saw the mismatched OCS train heading north at Habersham. The Davis Creek Trestle is just south of Habersham at a place known as Ilford. The towering structure is the tallest of the 14 bridges in the gorge. Here, at the crest of the grade, coal train C740 was still crawling its way up the 1% hill between Habersham and Duff. Once the locomotives pass by the signals, the train will begin a 1.4-mile descent on a 1.15% grade to Kilsey. From there, the grade continues for another 5 miles at 1% to La Follette.
C740, 30 southbound clear, north end of Kilsey, 5218 out.
Just beyond the grade crossing at Duff, manned helper units are cut off from the southbound trains. In the past, this was done on the fly, but lately, trains stop and the helper crew then manually uncouples before returning to Morley for their next assignment. We'll show you what cutting off on the fly looked like in some throwback footage, but first, you'll see several trains working hard up the grade on different dates and from different angles.
304. Got a clear signal north into Kelsey on the main southbound.
On April 18th, we recorded auto-wreck train M209 from the opposite side of the grade crossing. The two 4,400 horsepower GEs were strong enough to get the train over the crest unassisted. Five years ago, we caught southbound loaded grain train G119 at Duff with a Union Pacific AC 4400 on the point. Before CSX changed its system-wide train symbols in 2022, the Morley Helper operated as C212. While the train ID was different back then, the motive power was familiar, another lone AC 4400, this one still wearing its original YN2 paint. As the train rounded the curve, the helper unit uncoupled on the fly, a rare maneuver on modern Class 1 railroads and a thrill for rail fans hoping to witness authentic mountain railroading. Duff Mountain is one of only 2 helper districts on CSX rails in Tennessee, with the other located along the former NC and St. L mainline at Cowan. We covered Cowan's Cumberland Mountain grade in a recent production that features the Chessie Heritage unit working as a pusher. The dispatcher returned the signal to the north, and the helper went back to Morley for its next assignment.
33 north C212. Got a clear.
Back in October 2022, we saw this southbound loaded rail train at Kelsey, making track speed as it made its way down grade. We later intercepted the train to La Follette and Vasper, locations in the following scenes. Vasper is home to one of 3 horseshoe-shaped tunnels on this portion of the KD in Tennessee. R.J. Corman's Jellicoe branch lies atop this tunnel and is the former Southern Railway line L&N once used via trackage rights to gain access to Knoxville before building what is now the CSX KD sub between 1902 and 3. In June 2020, we caught the northbound CSX OCS train from the north portal of Vasper Tunnel. At Lake City, the KD parallels the Jellicoe branch seen to the right. Dosset Yard is at milepost 250 and is where Norfolk Southern's K&O district crosses over the CSX KD sub. It's also where the 8.5-mile Cow Creek branch begins, coming off the KD and heading west toward Oliver Springs. It was built in 1904 to access coal mines in Oliver Springs and in nearby Harriman. When the TVA's Kingston Fossil Plant came online in 1954, L&N and later CSX used this branch line to deliver coal to the plant until the late 2000s. Dosset has only 3 tracks and more resembles a Y than a traditional rail yard. On September 12, 2019, we caught northbound manifest Q542 exiting the horseshoe-shaped Black Oak Ridge Tunnel south of Dosset Yard. This is the longest tunnel on the KD, stretching approximately 3/4 of a mile. Note the fog gathering around the portal, a direct result of the cooler air within the tunnel. Assisting the lone Tier 4 GEVO on the point of this day's Q542 was another Tier 4 GEVO, acting as the rear DPU. A shorter train than usual, the single DPU would provide sufficient motive power in pushing the train up Duff Mountain, so no manned helper was required. There's one more tunnel on the KD at Solway. It's shorter than Black Oak Ridge, but not by much, and it is curved. Solway Tunnel is on the outskirts of Knoxville, and there are no roads that parallel the KD, making it extremely difficult to catch up to southbound trains between there and Knoxville. You really have to be intentional with your shots south of Dosset, or else you'll risk losing southbound trains altogether while playing catch-up in Knoxville traffic. We hope you enjoyed part 1 of our Corbin to Cartersville series, which covered the difficult mountain grades of the KD between Corbin and Knoxville. We look forward to releasing parts 2 and 3 of this series in the near future, so stay tuned. Until then, thank you for watching Delay in Block Productions, and happy railroading!